You've been planning it for months. You tell yourself you're being smart, being cautious, being strategic. But deep down, something else is happening. You're not preparing, you're stalling. Every not yet is a shield. Every list, every journal, every brainstorm, a quiet way of saying, I'm not ready. But what if that's the real trap? What if all this preparation is just fear in disguise? Carl Jung warned us, what we resist doesn't go away. It waits, it grows. It finds new forms, perfectionism, productivity, planning, and then it owns us. Be honest. How many ideas have you buried under someday? How many versions of you have you abandoned before they even had the chance to breathe? You say you're waiting for the right time. But what if time has been waiting for you? What if the real courage is not in having the perfect plan, but in starting before you're ready? What are you really hiding behind your not yet? That's where we begin. You think you're being wise, careful, mature. You tell yourself it's good to think before you act. And sure, sometimes it is. But this is something else. This isn't thinking. It's hiding. You keep polishing the idea, perfecting the vision, editing the sentence that hasn't even been written. But in your chest, there's pressure, a silent ache, a whisper that says, you were supposed to start already. Thinking can be a prison made of logic. You look around, and it seems everyone is moving. Everyone is building, launching, risking. And you're still deciding. But deep down, the decision was already made. You said yes a long time ago. You just didn't give yourself permission. Because permission means vulnerability. And vulnerability means exposure. Carl Jung described this freeze as a rupture between the conscious self and the deeper psyche. You plan because you don't want to feel what happens when you move. You strategize because you're afraid of what's waiting on the other side of action. This isn't about laziness. It's about fear, not fear of failure, but fear of becoming. What if you're not scared of what will go wrong, but of what will finally go right? What if you build an entire identity around waiting? What if the longer you hesitate, the heavier the weight becomes? And still, you keep saying, soon, almost, just a bit more time. But life isn't asking for your perfection. It's asking for your presence. The longer you wait, the less you recognize yourself. There comes a moment when even silence starts to scream, not outside, inside. You sit still, but your nervous system is already exhausted. From all the things you almost did, from the potential you keep locking in the basement, you're not avoiding action. You're avoiding emotion, because deep beneath the waiting is grief. Grief for how long you've stalled. Grief for the versions of you that could have existed by now. And under that grief is rage. Rage at how many times you betrayed yourself with later. How many times you said, I'm not ready, when what you really meant was, I'm afraid no one will catch me if I jump. Perfection is just fear in a pretty dress. Jungian psychology explains this as the shadow of action. When your will is intact, but your courage is missing, the psyche retreats inward until even hope becomes painful. You scroll, you compare, you clap for others, but you don't move because movement would make it real. And real means risk. So you wait for clarity. You wait for energy. You wait for signs. But they've already come. They came in the ache, in the anger, in the quiet resentment you feel every time someone else does what you keep postponing. You're not unmotivated. You're unconvinced you deserve to begin. And that is a quiet tragedy. There's a secret behind your endless planning, and it's not discipline. It's protection. You've built a mental fortress around your potential, so no one can reach it, not even you. You say you're waiting for the right conditions, but the real reason is much harder to admit. You don't feel safe being seen. It's not failure that scares you. It's exposure. You confuse thinking with movement, but one moves you forward. The other circles around the same starting point. like pacing before a door you never open, like rereading a map without ever walking the road. Each time you say later, you choose safety over becoming. You want guarantees. You want to know how it will end before you even begin. But life doesn't offer scripts. It offers thresholds. And courage isn't knowing what will happen. It's choosing anyway. Carl Jung referred to this avoidance as the psyche's attempt to bypass individuation. The self resists emergence, not because it's lazy, but because it senses how irreversible transformation will be. Once you begin, you can't go back to pretending. To act is to make a declaration. I exist. That's why you hesitate. Because the moment you start, you'll be accountable for being visible. No more hiding behind potential. No more worshiping the future while avoiding the present. Because once you begin, your power becomes real. And real power always attracts resistance. Suddenly, others will notice. And not everyone will celebrate it. Some will criticize. Some will project their own fear onto you. Some will try to pull you back. Not because you're doing it wrong, but because your movement reminds them of their stillness. Every act of courage is a quiet rebellion against collective fear. So you delay, you perfect, you overthink, because as long as it's not quite ready, no one can touch it. You stay in the world of ideas, because in that world, nothing is lost, but nothing is lived either. You think you're protecting your dream by not starting, but in truth, you're slowly suffocating it. Because dreams don't need perfection. They need air. They need risk. They need motion. What stays inside too long becomes fear. You revise the plan. You color code the files. You redesign the cover. You pretend it's discipline. But really it's grief in slow motion. Jung emphasized that the unconscious resists real change, not because it's evil, but because it fears collapse. The collapse of who you've been pretending to be, the roles you've outgrown, the stories you've told yourself to survive. So your psyche creates delays, not as punishment, but as defense. I just need to figure this out first, is your inner child begging not to be judged. I need a better strategy, is a disguised prayer. Please don't let me be seen before I'm perfect. You are not overwhelmed. You are over-armored. You've made hyper-preparedness your identity. But preparation is a phase, not a purpose. You weren't born to plan forever. You were born to begin. And somewhere deep inside, you know this. You feel the pull, the restlessness, the haunting feeling that you're late to your own life, that strange sadness when someone else starts, and you don't, that tightness in your throat when you watch others share, speak, risk, and you stay silent. Your soul is louder than your schedule. There's nothing wrong with structure, but when structure becomes shelter, you lose touch with aliveness. Real growth is not efficient. It's messy, chaotic, sometimes humiliating, but it's real, and real is what you crave more than anything. Not applause, not safety, not even certainty. Just that feeling of finally moving, of seeing the world shift because you did. Clarity comes from movement, not from stillness. You don't need another plan. You need a beginning, even a small one, even one that no one sees. Because the psyche doesn't awaken through thinking. It awakens through contact, through touch, through action, through the trembling yes that breaks your perfection mask. And in that crack, light enters. Let's be honest. You romanticize your preparation. You told yourself, this is sacred. I'm being intentional. This is wise. I'm not rushing. This is strength. I'm building something real. But what if that story is your favorite illusion? What if you've just mastered the art of intellectual hiding? The mind is clever, but the body always knows the truth. Because your body has been whispering, with tension, with fatigue, with that subtle collapse in your chest every time you say soon. And your soul, it's growing impatient. You can feel it. in those moments right before sleep, when all the noise fades, and you hear the truth too clearly to ignore. You've built a palace of almost, of maybe, of one day, but it's empty. Jung believed that illusions often protect us from psychic death, from having to face the truth of what we're not living, because once the illusion is shattered, you have no excuse left, and that's terrifying. The scariest moment is not to fall, it's to step off the ledge. You've said all the right things, read all the books, mapped every angle, talked about your vision so beautifully. People thought you were already living it, but you weren't. You were performing proximity to purpose, like standing at the edge of the stage, reciting lines, but never stepping into the light. A plan without action is just a beautifully crafted cage. And here's the real heartbreak. You thought perfection would protect you from criticism, from rejection, from loss. But in trying to avoid pain, you also avoided power, because your real strength lives on the other side of the risk, not behind it. You wanted to be safe. You wanted to be ready. You wanted to make sure everything was aligned. But in that wanting, you weighted yourself into invisibility. At some point, the search for readiness became the ritual of hiding. You told yourself, if I just learn more, heal more, organize more, then I'll finally start. But healing is not the finish line. It's the entry point, and no amount of clarity can replace the courage to be seen in motion. You hope for a version of life where risk didn't feel like exposure, where pain never came with growth, where you could become without having to be broken open. But that version doesn't exist. You wanted change without chaos. But transformation is a storm. You can't tiptoe into becoming. You have to walk through the fire. And yes, some things will burn. Old identities, old relationships, old versions of self that never really fit. But what remains is real and raw and yours. Carl Jung warned us, when we deny life its necessary tensions, we create neurosis, an inner ache born from a life unlived. That's what you're feeling now. Not depression, not fatigue, not procrastination, but soul contraction, a closing inward, because you never let yourself open outward. The longer you delay your truth, the heavier the illusion becomes. And suddenly, even silence starts to hurt. Even rest feels restless. Even stillness feels suffocating, because you've outgrown the waiting room. You don't need more ideas. You don't need more planning apps. You don't need another course. You need to shatter the mirror of what if and walk out of the draft. You are not here to perfect a blueprint. You are here to build a life, not from the safety of theory, but from the sacred mess of experience. This isn't the death of your dream. This is the death of your delay. So what now? Now that the illusion is gone, what remains? You, still here, still breathing, still wanting, not the polished version, not the perfectly outlined vision. Just you. You're not late. You were just circling your own door. And maybe that door never needed a key, only your presence. Carl Jung believed the journey toward wholeness doesn't begin with answers. It begins with turning inward, with finally sitting in the raw space between resistance and readiness. Can you do that? Can you stop fixing and start feeling? Not feeling better, not feeling in control, just feeling the ache, the fear, the longing, because beneath the plans was never strategy. It was heartbreak. You weren't avoiding action. You were avoiding your own unmet self. Beneath every delay is a deeper disconnect. So you come back, not to your task list, but to your breath. You return to the moment before you learn to earn your worth, before productivity became your identity. You stand at the edge of becoming, and this time, you don't negotiate with it. You soften, you breathe, you stay, even when it trembles, even when the voice says you're not enough. Because the real work isn't building something outside. It's reclaiming what's been buried inside. You were never supposed to prove yourself. Only meet yourself. Not in the applause. Not in the outcome. But here, in the decision to begin. Starting isn't proof. It's presence. You start not because you feel ready, but because your soul is tired of waiting. You start not because you know how, but because staying stuck is no longer an option. And that starting might be quiet, might be invisible, might look like a whisper instead of a roar. That's fine. The psyche doesn't need noise. It needs truth. Carl Jung wrote of the self as the integration point of all you are, the conscious, the shadow, the fear, the desire. And that integration doesn't happen in your head. It happens when you act from alignment, even when the fear is loud. Healing isn't comfort. It's contact. Contact with your longing. Contact with your shame. Contact with the thing you want so deeply it makes you ache. Because you can't think your way into transformation. You must step into it with shaking hands, with imperfect timing, with a soft yes that no one hears but you. This is the beginning, not of a project, not of a plan, but of a relationship with your most honest self. You don't need to be ready. You need to be real. And in that realness, your life begins again. There comes a moment. It doesn't announce itself. No lightning, no trumpet, just breath and a quiet voice that says, enough. Not enough suffering, but enough waiting. Enough betraying yourself through hesitation. Enough mourning a life you haven't let yourself live. The door you're waiting to find will appear when you move. It doesn't matter what you do first. It matters that you do it, because your psyche doesn't speak in achievements. It speaks in momentum. And even a tremble is movement. Even a whisper is direction. Even a breath is a choice. Carl Jung said that the greatest burden a child can carry is the unlived life of a parent. But what about the unlived life inside you? What if your delay is not just yours, but ancestral? What if the hesitation in your blood is the echo of generations who weren't allowed to begin? When you begin, you break more than your own pattern. You liberate the future. You rewrite the past. You stop the loop. You say, it ends with me. You rise, not in fire, but in stillness, not to fight, but to feel. You walk toward what you've avoided. You face what you've buried. You hold what used to haunt you. And something shifts. The world doesn't change, but your posture does. You become undeniable the moment you stop negotiating your existence. This is not motivation. This is not hustle. This is resurrection. The return of your will. The reawakening of direction. The subtle, holy moment when you stop postponing yourself. You won't be ready. You won't feel perfect, but you'll be present. And that is power. Not power over anyone, but power over your own pattern. You stop asking life to wait for you, and you begin to meet it. There's no more performance now. No more waiting for feedback, permission, alignment. Just a quiet decision. I go. And with each step, you reclaim the parts of you that never needed fixing, only freeing. You don't need the whole staircase. You need one step, and then another. This is how you return to yourself, not through certainty, but through sacred motion. You were never lost. You were paused. But now, finally, you press play. Your life has already started. The question is, will you join it? You don't need more clarity. You don't need more time. You need to arrive. Fully. Finally. Now, let this be your line in the sand. Let this be the moment you choose motion over myth. Let this be the whisper. I begin. Perfection was never your task. Presence was. You owe no one an explanation, no post, no proof. But if this reached you, deeply, quietly, like breath, then maybe you're one of us. One of those who are done waiting, who are tired of the illusion, who are ready to return to the rhythm of becoming. So write it in the comments, in your journal, on your mirror. I begin. even if no one sees it. If you felt this, stay close. The real path is just beginning. This was never about starting perfectly. It was about starting honestly. Welcome back.